What if I told you your phone has become more addictive to you than cocaine ever is to its users? Most people think that sounds insane. The average person reaches for their phone merely 100 times a day, which means once every few minutes of consciousness. Meanwhile, heavy cocaine users typically engage only a handful of times daily. By pure behavioral patterns, your phone is the more powerful dependency, and it's rarely acknowledged. I didn't understand this until it hit me personally. I checked my usage one night and saw I'd lost almost half a day to my screen, more time than I'd spent sleeping. And what shook me most wasn't the number, it was the fact that I couldn't remember what any of that time was actually spent on. Here's what almost no one tells you. Your attention is part of an industry worth over $700 billion a year. Companies like Facebook, Google, and TikTok aren't social platforms, they're attention extraction systems. And the product being sold isn't content, it's you. Every scroll, every swipe, every just 5 more minutes is intentionally designed. Infinite scrolling wasn't a happy accident. Those red notification badges weren't chosen randomly. Even the pull to refresh gesture is modeled after the lever on a slot machine. But this is where it crosses from disturbing into deliberate. The people designing your apps aren't guessing. They employ the same neuroscientists who study gambling addiction. The psychological techniques used to keep people glued to casino slot machines are embedded directly into the apps on your phone. A former Google design ethicist once said, "The real problem isn't a lack of willpower. It's that thousands of trained professionals are working on the other side of the screen with one goal, to overwhelm whatever discipline you think you have." You were never meant to win this fight. This was the threat I never saw coming. I genuinely believed I was smarter than the system. For nearly 3 years, I tried to beat the algorithm. I experimented with everything: app blockers, digital detoxes, hard resets. I'd delete Instagram, uninstall TikTok, block YouTube on my browser. Sometimes it worked, for a week, occasionally even for months. I'd feel ahead of everyone else, like I'd escaped while others were still trapped. And then it would happen. One harmless check would spiral into a 6-hour binge, leaving me drained, empty, and embarrassed. That's when the realization hit. The apps aren't the addiction, they're the dealer. The real dependency is the need to be entertained, to keep the brain constantly stimulated, to never sit alone with your own thoughts. We've built a generation that can't tolerate 30 seconds of boredom without reaching for a screen. Now let's talk about what scrolling is doing beneath the surface, not metaphorically, biologically. Each time your screen gives you something rewarding, a reaction, a reply, or even a post that barely catches your interest, your brain delivers a hit of dopamine. That's the same reward signal tied to food, intimacy, and powerful narcotics. But here's where things quietly spiral. Social platforms don't release dopamine in predictable ways. They run on uncertainty. Sometimes you're rewarded, sometimes you're not, and you never know which swipe will do it. That unpredictability is the core mechanism behind gambling addiction. Over time, your nervous system adapts. What once held your attention for hours loses its effect almost immediately, so your behavior escalates. You scroll quicker, you absorb more, you chase stronger stimulation. If that pattern feels familiar, it should. A Stanford medical researcher once described this cycle as digital heroin. And like any dependency, withdrawal shows up fast. Restlessness, low mood, mental fog, even phantom vibrations. This is the evidence that reframes the entire conversation. Researchers at Stanford followed 2 separate groups of people who all wanted the same thing: to spend less time on their screens. The first group took the conventional route: screen limits, willpower, app restrictions, detoxes. The second group did something different. Instead of fighting consumption, they replaced it. Time that used to be spent scrolling was redirected into creating, writing, coding, music, art. 6 months later, the results weren't even close. Group A reduced screen time by an average of 12%. Group B reduced it by 73%. And here's the twist. Group B wasn't even trying to reduce screen time. They were just creating more. So why does this succeed where everything else breaks down? Because your brain isn't broken, it's hungry. It craves novelty, challenge, and dopamine. Social media delivers all 3 in shallow, disposable fragments. Creation delivers the same ingredients, but in ways that last. When you scroll, dopamine is handed to you. When you create, dopamine is earned. And earned dopamine feels different. Think about it. Have you ever finished an 8-hour Netflix binge feeling proud? Now compare that to the last time you spent a few focused hours working on something that mattered to you. Which experience stayed with you longer? But creation does something deeper than reducing screen time. It changes who you are. The moment you start creating, you stop living as a consumer and begin operating as a contributor. You move from watching to building, from observing to expressing, from following directions to setting them. Most people never make this shift. They stay locked inside an identity that's passive and comfortable, not because they can't escape it, but because they never question it. This is where things get uncomfortable. Most people will never make this change, not because they don't understand it, but because consumption is easier than creation. Watching is easier than practicing. Following is easier than leading. People will spend hours watching videos about learning guitar instead of sitting down and actually playing. They'll watch cooking content instead of cooking, read about fitness instead of exercising, consume productivity advice instead of being productive. It's safer to live through someone else's output than risk creating your own. I know this because I lived in it. The moment I realized I knew more about creators' routines than my own goals, that's when something snapped. This is the conclusion I reached after studying behavioral psychology and testing it on myself and dozens of others. Your dependency isn't the phone, it's mental idleness. The only solution that holds long-term is replacing idleness with deliberate creation. So here's the challenge. For the next 3 months, every time you feel the urge to consume mindless content, create something instead. It doesn't matter what. Write a paragraph, sketch an idea, code something simple, record a voice note, film a short video. Track 2 things daily: how much you consume and how much you create. Here's what happens. Within the first month, consumption drops naturally. By month 2, creating feels better than scrolling. And by the end of 3 months, you'll struggle to understand how you ever lived any other way. There's one final detail you can't ignore. This has to be an identity shift, not a habit tweak. You're not someone trying to use your phone less. You're someone who creates more than they consume. I don't usually recommend movies or documentaries. I'm not really into doing that. But if you ever want to understand how intentional all of this really is, there's a documentary called The Social Dilemma that connects a lot of the dots. It's not opinion, it's former insiders explaining how these systems were built. Thank me later. Because here's the truth. In a world full of consumers, creators hold the leverage. They gain the influence, fulfillment, and freedom that consumers keep chasing through endless scrolling. So the real question isn't whether this works. The evidence already answered that. The question is whether you'll act, or save this video and go right back to the feed. What's it going to be? Thanks for watching. If this added value, subscribe for more work like this. See you in the next one.